This video is a part of a series on the history of money through ancient and classical Greece. While the focus of the series is on the monetary side of history, it is also necessary to give the historic context to paint a more accurate picture of the culture that shaped the money and how the money shaped the culture. So those of you that are not specifically interested in the monetary history of Greece will still find these videos fascinating and informative. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to check out the rest of the series and subscribe to the channel. In this video, we'll be exploring the two rising powers in classical Greece, Sparta and Athens. In our last video, the Mycenaeans were wiped out along with all other Bronze Age civilizations. Their cities were sacked and burned during the late Bronze Age by barbarians from the seas. The Bronze Age had seen a rise in large, complex societies and civilizations that had vast trade networks. Their civilizations enjoyed a very high standard of living that would not be enjoyed until the late Renaissance era. The time directly after the fall of the Bronze Age, between 1200 and 1000 BCE, there was little that would have taken place in the region of Greece. It would have taken several hundred years for the fragmented settlements to grow large enough to become what we think of as Sparta and Athens. Growing populations lead to ever-growing borders and ever more consistent conflicts.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Sparta, known for its warrior society, was not always this way. They were not always a highly disciplined and strict military society. The land in Greece was not known for being remarkably fertile. Many of the city-states that would start colonies in other places near and around modern-day Greece surrounding the Mediterranean, like frogs around a pond, Plato. The land that the Spartans inhabited was no different, but the Spartans would take a different approach. As the Spartan population grew, they needed new lands to cultivate to survive. Sparta was landlocked and sported no navy, so rather than exporting its population to colonies, it would have to turn to military conquest. The Spartans would take over the land surrounding their settlements, and then soon head south towards the sea where they would conquer the Helots. The Helots would be enslaved and subjected to extreme scrutiny. There was a tale of 5,000 Helots to be recruited for military service. After a week after they had been selected, the 5,000, in the night, all disappeared and were never seen from again. After all the low-hanging fruit had been subjugated, the Spartans looked north for their final push, a push that would secure their dominance in the Peloponnesian Peninsula and provide them with fertile farmland, a land that would be capable of supporting their growing population. The final prize was on the other side of the mountains, in the plains of Mycenae, where the Bronze Age civilization once stood. Between 730 BCE and 710 BCE, Sparta fought and won a long war against the Mycenaeans. Sparta now controlled an area of over 3,000 acres of land. The Spartans found themselves dangerously extended. After a revolt threatened to topple their regional power, Sparta would change its culture to that of a military society where boys would be removed from their families at the age of 7, and the process of creating one of the most effective soldiers of their day would begin. Sparta would boast no walls, and at its peak it looked only like a haphazard, unimpressive cluster of 4 towns. This lack of walls was incredibly unusual during this time period, as peace was merely a brief interruption of war, not the other way around. The Spartans took pride in the fact that they had no walls. When asked, a Spartan king pointed to some of the Spartan soldiers and replied, "These are our walls." This was only partly true, as the valley that they inhabited was surrounded by nearly impassable mountains and very few narrow passes. Iron bars of low denominational value were used as currency in Sparta to discourage large transactions, and young men as well were discouraged from taking and making money. Women would take charge of all commerce and enterprise in Sparta. Sparta would have no navy and held little value in the arts and commerce. The majority of their manufactured goods would come from the surrounding near area that was first conquered, not directly out of the Spartan population. Their armies would rule on land, and this would be counterbalanced by the other growing power, Athens, to the north. They became the yin and yang of their times. Athens was built 3,000 years ago on an acropolis and allowed it to be born and scrape through the final falling years of the Bronze Age. It was ruled by kings until Corodos, ruler of Athens, sacrificed his life in order to save his homeland. From that time forward, there were no ruling kings. The ruling class simply became an elite class of nobles. This would be the first step of many to set the citizens of Athens on the road to revolt and democracy. The governing body was made up of 9 men, chosen from the nobility, and they acted as a high court. Similar to Sparta, Athens, in the beginning, was a small and unimpressive cluster of villages, with surrounding small farms. There was little to no room for advancement in the society, and the nobles ruled supreme. The majority of Athens citizens toiled in the field and on simple crafts. They would have no rights, no property, and have no say or stake in anything. In the mid-6th century, the fate of Athens would change, when a dashing man rode into Athens with a girl that he claimed was the patron goddess Athena. His name was Pisistratus, and he would change the fate of Athens forever. Remarkably, Athens accepted this dashing character as their new ruler, despite the rather obvious fact that the girl was simply a very tall and beautiful girl from a neighboring village. Pisistratus would unify the population to the Acropolis. Homes were moved to Athens city center. People would now leave the city to tend their fields rather than leave their farms to visit the cities. The city of Athens, unlike Sparta, sported large walls around the Acropolis that Athens would seek protection behind during times of war. This would not be the only large difference between the two growing powers, Athens and Sparta, that would soon clash against the world, and later against one another. Pisistratus, to consolidate his power and rule, so that he could one day successfully pass his throne onto his son, turned to a new ally. He looked to empower the common man, who before were no more than serfs, and who had no claim to property and no stake in anything. The bold move would bypass the power of the nobles and diminish their monopoly on land and wealth. He would reduce taxes and provided free loans so that the people could build up their farms. By doing this, the face of Athens began to change, from a poverty-stricken town to an ever-growing and advancing city. It was at this time that agrarianism took hold and began to flourish, now being unshackled from the rent-seeking destruction of its former ruling upper class. An explosion in vineyards and olive trees being planted took place. The foundations for Athens' future trade power had quite literally just been sown. The land around Athens was perfect for olives, and Athens would produce the best quality in the Greek world. This commodity was not only limited to cooking oil, but there were over 60 pharmaceutical applications, including the healing of skin problems, stomach pains, and ear infections. It was the petroleum of its day. The olive oil was called liquid gold. Greece's central location in the Mediterranean Sea perfectly situated them to trade with the ready markets, not only in Greece, but across the Mediterranean, with Egypt, Persia, and Assyria. Trade boomed, and Athens would enjoy a rich trade for generations to follow, as merchant ships from all around the classical world would make port in their harbors. This would launch Athens into the stages as a regional trading powerhouse. Still not an empire, but the foundations were set. After Pisistratus' death, his son would not rule so justly, and a revolt in 508 BCE would be launched against his heavy-handed rule and oppressive and restrictive laws. No longer would the people of Athens be trodden down under the foot of the elite class after tasting freedom. The revolt was successful, and democracy would be instituted, a white pebble for yes, and a black pebble for no. The common man would now take part in his future. It was at this time that an equally important event was taking place across the sea. In a country of Lydia, the first coins were being struck. The coin was minted from a naturally occurring combination of silver and gold. The coins were a part of a new government style that would bring precision and organization that far exceeded the levels of storehouses and priests. The coins helped raise and fund armies, facilitated building projects, and would maintain the power of the state. The coins would be required as payment method for taxes. This in turn would mean that shops would be required to provide some sort of service to the army or the state in order to obtain this new form of payment. Some of these coins would circulate, and some would be taxed back into the state. This new invention would be posed perfectly to change the face of Athens. Prior to this, Athens would have used ingots of glass, copper, tin, brass, silver, and gold to facilitate trade. They would have been an advanced system to that of the Bronze Age, and would have been stamped for purity, and more often than not, for weights as well. This removed the process of assessing the metals during every transaction. Coins were about to break onto the free markets of Athens and revolutionize the Greek world. This new economic power would begin militarizing and expanding, standing toe-to-toe with some of the world's largest armies in history. Join us in our next video for the history and power behind these coins that would fund the armies that would march against Persia and fund massive building projects to create temples whose ruins still are admired to this day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and check out the remainder of the series. And as always, thank you for watching.